Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for WECC's Resource Adequacy Discussion Series. I'd like to take a look at a couple upcoming events that we're going to be hosting at WECC before we get started today. Our first event that I want to highlight is our Grid Fundamentals course. This is happening in person. First time we've done it for several years in person here at WECC, August 22nd and 23rd. It is in person here at the WECC offices. It's two unique half-day sessions. We'll be talking about how the electric power system works. We'll review technology, operations, markets, regulation, how it's managed and why. Again, that is on the 22nd and 23rd of August. And I believe a link for the registration will be provided in the chat. This is an introductory course, so feel free to share that to some of your employees that may be interested in learning more about the power system itself. Our next event is going to be October 31st through November 1st. It's the Reliability and Security Workshop, and it is being hosted in beautiful San Diego, California. So looking forward to that. We've got a copy of the agenda and registration, a link to that in the chat for you as well. So mark your calendars for that event. Next, we'll take a look at WECC's antitrust policy. All WECC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WECC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All meetings must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in the open session. This webinar is also being recorded and it will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WECC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WECC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact our legal counsel. All right, again, thank you for attending WECC's Resource Adequacy Discussion Series. Today we'll be considering consumer impacts. It is June 8th. Appreciate everyone joining. I'm Travis English. I'm WECC Senior Training and Outreach Specialist. I also have Victoria Ravenscroft on the line as well. She's the Senior Policy and External Affairs Manager here. Oh, I just saw a wave from you out there, Victoria. The two of us will be helping moderate the questions in the chat and answers during today's discussion. So feel free to use that raise your hand feature or the chat feature as well throughout today's discussion. We encourage you, this is an open discussion, so we encourage you to ask questions of the panelists. And Branden Sudduth, who is WECC's Vice President of Reliability and Planning Performance Analysis here at WECC. Branden, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Travis, and welcome again to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our resource adequacy discussion series. I'm not sure if Travis mentioned this, but we will be taking a break in July and then resuming the series once again in August. But today we have a really exciting topic. We had a prep call about a week ago with the presenters, and I was just getting excited at some of the discussion we were able to start having. So really excited for the conversation that we're going to have today, and looking forward to attendee participation in your questions as well. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, our panelists for today. So joining us, we have Michele Beck. Michele is the executive director of the Utah Office of Consumer Services and has been since 2007. So as Utah's consumer advocate, she represents and advocates on behalf of Utah's residential and small commercial customers of public utilities. Michele's also no stranger to WECC activities. She's been serving on our member advisory committee for several years, is very plugged into all of the WECC happenings. So we're excited to have Michele join us today. We also have Sherrie Villmark. She is a program director for the Community Energy Project. The Community Energy Project is based out of the Portland metro area, and Sherrie specifically has 20 years of experience in a variety of community education approaches, including environmental interpretation, voter education and mobilization, skill building, public speaking, consulting, and advocacy with decision makers. So we're really excited to have Sherrie participating as well. And as you can see, we're well represented in when it comes to residential and small commercial consumers of electricity. So really looking forward to the conversation. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into questions for our panelists today. And, please feel free to ask each other questions. You can ask me questions. Let's really make this conversational. So I'm gonna tee it up and just ask a general question that our audience might be curious of, and that is, how do customers impact resource adequacy? Let me ask that maybe a little bit different. How might customer disenfranchisement and lack of knowledge affect resource adequacy? So I'll go ahead and just throw that out there, and Michele, Sherrie, please feel free to jump on in.
I was waiting for Sherrie. I feel like she's a little bit more close, kind of close to the ground in understanding customer disenfranchisement. But from my perspective, where I'm representing customers in regulatory proceedings, to me, I think it's going to be a while before customer disenfranchisement at the micro level, at the residential and small commercial level, will impact resource adequacy. But I see on the horizon that demand response is going to be an increasing part of the puzzle of maintaining resource adequacy. So to me, it's more of a potential lost opportunity. Like if we don't have if we see a lot of customer disenfranchisement, we're missing out on something that could be one of the lower cost ways of meeting resource adequacy. So it's more of a let's make sure it doesn't happen. Let's make sure we maximize this resource and keep these folks a part of the overall solution. And so I don't think that right now we're facing that so much, but it's more of a let's make sure that we maximize this potential resource.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that because I'm used to thinking about it the other way around, like how are customers impacted. So, but yeah, I would agree with what Michele just said, where when we're talking about a changing system where customer participation, whether it's active like thermostat level or something more passive like smart technology, affecting your water heater and when it's heating up its water, what is really easy to do is roll out programs that are for like more homogenous audiences. So smart technology particularly typically requires, say, Wi-Fi, internet at home. And the digital divide is a real problem with a lot of audiences. For example, about half of people with a high school diploma as their highest level of education don't have internet at home. And when you add in like really low incomes, people of color, there are a lot of people that don't have home internet. And therefore, if you're rolling out a new program that requires people to have internet access at home in order to participate in, managing peak times and flex loads and things like that, then it's not going to work. And if you're coming into low-income communities or low-income counties or rural communities, it's just going to be exacerbated. And that's where, when you're designing programs, you need to keep in mind that there are things that seem really like everybody has this, and that's simply not the case.
Oh, that's great, Sherrie. You kind of opened up something there that I want to dig into a little bit deeper, and that is, 15, 20 years ago, consumers really didn't care much about where their electricity came from, as long as they, when they flipped the switch, the lights came on, or when they needed electricity for manufacturing processes, as long as the electrons kept flowing, they really didn't think much about the use of or the control of electricity usage. So now we're living in a much different environment. People are very conscious about the type of energy they're using, when they're using it. You mentioned different types of technology that people have adopted, smart thermostats. You know, what kind of education do consumers need about resource adequacy?
I think it is a mix of education and access. So I have found that when it comes to education, experts are usually not the best educators. When you develop a deep expertise in something, you often forget what it's like to not know those things deeply. Like we get into it in our industries all the time, acronym soup, right? You're just throwing around acronyms like a second language. So I think that I've seen a lot of like utility education be really complicated. And we have in the distribution systems planning space, typically you'll have an engineer that's teaching about a topic. And it's so deep and it's so technical that only a few people in the audience understand it. So if you're wanting to reach out to new audiences, experts are not typically your best teachers. And another piece of that is relevancy. Why do I need to know about DSP, right? Like, what do I do with that information? And so connecting, well, this is how we move into a renewable energy era, right? Like, participation is really important so that we can have a cleaner grid. Like, these kinds of like relevancy aspects are important. And then that last piece of the action items have to be accessible. If you're asking people to participate in something and they can't do it, you know, like I said, because they don't have internet, they don't have the money, they don't know how to install these things themselves, and they don't own the property, so they can't make changes. You know, all of these different barriers would make it so that what you're teaching them is trivia. And adults typically don't like to be educated on just things that are nifty to know. We like to know things that are useful in our daily lives.
And I'll build on that. And Sherrie talked about both education and access. So I have no disagreements with what she said about education, but I will observe that, you know, working in the Portland Metro, she might be in an environment where more resources will be dedicated to this problem than what maybe all of us are working, the environment that all of us are working in. And so there are going to be a lot of spaces where it's still the utility doing the educating. And I will say, with respect to the utilities that I work with, I have experienced the same thing. And I don't think that this is necessarily their area of expertise. Yet it might be our only option. So it's something that we really need to partner with utilities better and really ask our utility partners to rise to that occasion. But ultimately, I also think that access is the key. And it's certainly true that a lot of individuals are really interested in energy and do want to understand it better. But there's also a lot of people who never will. So I think it's incumbent on us to design programs so that they're very easy to participate, understandable. And on the program design level, we need to think about things like internet access. And we need to think about things like, how do we make this a set it and forget it kind of a program? Because ultimately, if we want large participation in the residential and small commercial sectors, that's going to have to be what it is.
And I'll add too that like utilities have incredible reach and a lot of incredible power. Like thinking about things that if you had smart technology that ran on data, like a cell phone instead of needing Wi-Fi, for example, like if utilities could change the market about what smart technology looks like. And I think that utilities can also work with other organizations. The ones we have locally are starting to work with CBOs to be like, how can we teach this stuff differently? How can we like get past, you know, this learning curve of how to be like better educators? Because the utilities like they have incredible reach with their customers and a lot of brand name recognition, right? Because they're interacting with their customers every single month. So I think I agree, there's huge potential there. It's just that typically like they know too much.
Yeah, and I'll second that, you know, and I won't take offense to any of this as an engineer. I get it. And, you know, the problems, or I shouldn't say the problems, the challenges that our industry is facing in terms of resource adequacy are extremely complicated. And you want to do your best to inform people. And, you know, as an engineer, the mindset is, you know, give them as much information as you can, as much data. But sometimes, especially for consumers, that can be very, very overwhelming. So I totally get that. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges as an industry, is to try and be as transparent and be the best teachers that we can about some of the opportunities and challenges that we're facing. So I know all three of us, you know, work for organizations that have access to information and data. How can we use that data that we have to best inform consumers about the choices that they're making?
Well, so some of these questions are hard, and because I feel like I want to make a little distinction here in terms of the individual consumers, but there's also the consumer reps who are really active in the regulatory field, and so to me there's sort of there's these different roles, and those who are really active in the regulatory field need that access to that data to really help inform the program design. And that's where I think, for example, I know a lot of consumer advocates are interested in some of the reports that WECC has started to put out in a way that it really helps inform us, helps us to better participate in regulatory processes. And then if we're talking about how data informs to the individual, I mean, that's hard. I mean, certainly there are folks who are going to be early adopters, who are really interested in this kind of stuff. They love it. They want to look at their smart meters. They want to see how things are going. They want to adopt all the latest technology. And so, but I don't want us to focus too much on data, because there's a lot of people who don't want to do that. They really don't. And so to me, I still take a step back and say, let's get it right at the program design level, and let's make data, looking and analyzing your personal data, optional, because, you know, a lot of folks that's never going to happen. And I'm never going to do it for mine. I'm just going to, so I don't come from a vulnerable population. I'm just, you know, too swamped with all the other things on my plate. And there's a lot of folks who are in that situation. So to me, I kind of want to say, let's take a step back and talk about data at the program design. Let's get it right. Let's get things that are valuable, that are understandable, that are easy to understand. And then while we talk about data, we also have to talk about data protection and privacy.
Great point.
Well said. I think too, like, you want to think about if you're talking about sharing data, it's like, what am I sharing and why? So one of the things, we had a series of listening sessions with low-income folks that we were serving about, like, the basics of the grid and participation in different, like, DER like programs. And one of the things that came up that people said they wanted was transparency regarding, you know, there was like questions of being like, are we the only ones that are expected to, like, say, make sacrifices, like turn down the AC on a really hot day, right? Who else is being expected to do this? Are commercial buildings changing their energy use? Like, so people were very sensitive to, like, bearing the burden and the responsibility and the sacrifices. And then they wanted to see what happened after. So people said they wanted data regarding, like, all right, we had a heat wave, we turned out, like, what were the successes? Who participated? What difference did it make? And that was a really common request we had from people. They're like, I made the sacrifice. Did I help my community? Did I help the environment? Did we all keep our power on? Like, these kinds of things, like, that they were told why they should participate. Did it work?
You know, Sherrie, that's a great point. And earlier, Michele brought up demand side response. And, you know, we know last year in California during the heat wave that occurred at the end of August, beginning of September, One of the tools that California used to reduce demand was to send out an alert to customers, asking for them to reduce electricity usage. And thinking about that type of approach in the future, do you have any insights or feelings about how customers would feel about those types of demand response programs, or that type of tool that would be used in times of maybe a last resort for avoiding energy shortfalls?
I actually was very lucky to meet one of the people who works for, it's called SMUD down in California, that had been one of the big communicators around that particular incident. And something that she said that's really stuck with me for a long time is that she said that didn't just come, that wasn't like everyone got a text message out of the blue, like change your energy behavior. She was like, there was a long time, years of working within community, communicating with community, engaging with community, and then they were called upon. And she referred it kind of like to like a social piggy bank. She goes, we were filling that piggy bank, and then the day came when we had to like break the bank open, like it was full. It was full because we had constant engagement with the people that did change their behaviors. And I think that that's a big piece, right? When it comes to people and asking people to do things, set it and forget it doesn't really work. You have to have that kind of continued engagement. And I wonder too about the transparency, right? They had a big success. And I think it's the mix between like, we're going to call on you when we need to, but not have people lose faith in the utility's ability to provide them power when it's necessary.
And so here, I'm going to maybe take a little bit of a contrarian view. So first of all, I think, okay, it worked for California. And I believe, even though I'm hearing it secondhand, that California put the money in, put the effort into the piggy bank. But I think that's hard. And I think that many jurisdictions do not have the systems to do that. And so I think that unless there is a very formalized system like that in place, I think that policymakers should be cautious about using that sort of call to action as an actual resource. So to me, I'm still a little skeptical to where I think it shouldn't be a resource. That resource adequacy means that we don't have to call people and say, hey, turn your air conditioning down. Because then I think over time, I'm just skeptical of how it works over time. I'm also confident that California can do things differently than maybe the rest of us can. But I am still skeptical of how it works over time, because I think it gets back to what Sherrie was saying before, where you start to hear the talk on the street and people are like, yeah, I'm not going to turn my air conditioning down for that. And then you think, why am I the schmo who did? And I just feel like that should be reserved for the true emergency situations, so that it can be that grand success. We averted emergency, but it shouldn't be used often. We need to have adequate resources. That should be our plan.
I think too, one of the big things that we've seen is like that when it comes to like disenfranchisement and inequity in the system, like asks are different for people in different situations. So on those days, like on any day where you're asking, even if it's just everyone turn down their air conditioning 2 degrees, right? Like that kind of ask, or turn down your air conditioning in general. When you have people who are in an extremely efficient home with like a home energy score of 10, you could turn off your air conditioning for hours and ride through a heat wave and be fine. If you're in a home energy score situation of 1, you turn that thing off for 2 or 3 minutes and you'll start to notice the difference. And low income people too also tend to kind of ride the edge already with comfort and safety. They keep their heat turned down pretty dang low all the time, all winter long, because of affordability, and may live in a house that's cold. So I think too, like customer engagement is something to be very careful about, because it can be potentially hazardous. And I think one of the kind of ethical questions that I don't know how to answer is, when you're offering like financial incentives to people to whom $15 or $10 is a big deal, and they're willing to like endanger themselves and already live in a situation that is more likely to be dangerous in extreme temperatures, you know, how do we handle that? And I'm an organization that does energy efficiency for low income people. So we're, you know, continually trying to like increase basically climate resilience for people to be able to handle power outages or situations where a window unit in your house like just isn't going to keep up with you know, what we're facing with like climate change.
Well, that's great, Sherrie. And I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit more to the cost component. You know, as I look out into the future, I continue to see more heat wave events, more extreme weather events. We've seen a trend over the last several years, and I don't think that's going to stop. And also, you know, the types of investments that the industry is making in new infrastructure, you know, at some point costs are going to start rising. You know, what can we do as an industry to help, you know, protect some of these low income customers? What types of programs can we consider, especially from a resource adequacy perspective, to make sure that that electricity remains accessible to all?
Yeah, we had 2 years ago, Oregon had a heat dome that killed over 100 Oregonians that were sheltered. That was just people inside their homes. And when we looked at where those fatalities were, who passed, there were situations where people had air conditioning that was not plugged in because they couldn't afford to like run their AC. And you have a lot of apartment complexes that in Portland where you weren't allowed to have AC, like it was forbidden to have a window unit. And so people who had no community to go to where they could like leave and go someplace with AC or housebound were extremely vulnerable. So I think that we're, you know, looking at a lot of different things from weatherization programs to get people's homes safer to deal with extreme heat events, but also, you know, the expense side of things. You know, we're looking at how can we protect our most financially vulnerable people. In Oregon, we just have the IOUs all have low income discount programs that are in pilot phases, essentially, where you get, you know, 20 to 40%, I think is currently the range, discounts to help buffer people from these price increases and to make it so like that could be the difference between maybe I will plug in my air conditioner when it's going to be 115 degrees out, and the people here don't know how to deal with those kinds of extreme temperatures and don't have the infrastructure for it. And I think that that's a start. I think it's a complicated answer that I'm certainly learning more and more about, because we're working with a lot of individuals, but like, how do we upscale, you know, what needs to be done regarding, I think, some of those basic things, which is just basic energy efficiency, which for low income communities is exceptionally difficult, even if they're homeowners, because there tends to be massive repair costs that need to be done before energy efficiency can be done from deferred maintenance, from not being able to afford maintenance over a long period of time.
So I want to, if you'll allow me, expand that conversation to not just include low income. So when we're talking about these, a lot of these low income discount programs are actually paid for by ratepayers in general. And a lot of the more, what do I want to say? The larger programs, the ones that are providing larger discounts, are newer and are piloted. But my concern is that it's starting to jeopardize affordability at a higher level of income, because those folks might not qualify for the program, but they're paying for the program. And I think we really need to keep that in mind and not just look at programs, discount programs for the lowest income, but look at affordability across the board. So one thing, and I haven't had a chance because I'm not that dexterous. I wanted to kind of take a peek at who all the attendees were today. Haven't done that yet. But I, at the risk of offending any utilities on the call, consumer advocates like to talk about blackout blackmail. And so where utilities will come in asking for approval to put something in rates, and it absolutely has to be done because, we won't be able to keep the lights on if you don't do it. And so sometimes I like to say I'm just old school when it comes to this. And it's the same thing that we've been doing for decades. And let's just keep looking at the cost effectiveness. So yes, we need to have resource adequacy. So let's set the standard, but let's still require that utilities meet the standard in the most cost effective way. So, as consumer advocates in these proceedings, sometimes we get labeled with, oh, they just want to oppose everything. That's not true. We desperately want resource adequacy, but we want utilities to come in and justify their requests and say, yes, we need this, and this is the most cost-effective way to achieve it. So I say old school still works sometimes, and I always want to see that. That demonstration rather than just coming in with emergency filings like you have to approve this. So just a little pitch for old school regulation there.
I'll say like cost effectiveness, and I think you're talking about a lot of things that I have zero experience, zero knowledge of when it comes to cost effectiveness. But I can say that having been held to certain cost-effective standards when it comes to like energy efficiency upgrades, it can really work against us at times because not everything is a straightforward calculation. A lot of times, you'll have for this energy efficiency upgrade to be made, there's this calculation that says that you spend $10,000, it has to save X amount of energy, period. It doesn't take into effect the health impacts of an upgrade. It doesn't take into effect like the safety of people indoors, like some of these climate resiliency. So I think that a lot of the calculations about cost are part of the picture, but not the entire picture, because there are bigger impacts that are not measured monetarily that are, I think, sometimes missing from some of those equations.
So I do understand that. I've worked in energy efficiency for a long time as well. We may have to agree to disagree on that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I think that if a utility wants to build this resource X, but resource Y is cheaper, they shouldn't be automatically allowed to build resource X, even though all of us want them to have sufficient resources. So I'm really talking about sort of the bigger picture of the underlying resource mix.
Right. I think where I think about it
utilities feet to the fire.
With like utility would be right, like if coal is cheaper, right, than solar, right? Like this is, I think this is a lot of like fossil fuel infrastructure, right? It's like it's cheaper, but now we're starting to say we want additional things with the equation, right?
Right.
Beyond
we can
money,
still talk about cost effective. As I say all the time, set the goal and achieve the goal in the most cost effective way. So if you're evolving, if you're in a jurisdiction that's evolving out of fossil fuels, now you've reset the goal, but you should still achieve that new goal in the most cost effective way, because otherwise, because we're going to see cost increases, all of us are, no matter what our goals are, because that's, as Branden's observed, there's going to be new investments needed. So set the goal and then achieve it in the most cost effective way.
Okay, because I think this is a good point to kind of take a pause and see if there are any audience questions coming in.
Branden, I'm not seeing any right now, but I invite anyone in the audience to use the raise your hand feature or put them in the chat as well, and I will let you know if anything comes in.
Okay, thank you, Travis. I do have one question that I kind of reserved from the beginning, and it really kind of gets back to this question about consumer impacts on resource adequacy. And from a utility perspective, from maybe a commission perspective, what are the risks, and they can be hidden risks to resource adequacy if these different types of stakeholders fail to take into account consumer concerns? What kind of resource adequacy risks might we be facing?
I don't know if I have more to add to that. I think that the risk is just, you know, the lost opportunity of what might be actually one of the lowest cost resources. So, you know, as we see an expansion of demand response, I think we're going to be looking for smaller and smaller increments. So we're really maximizing our system, maximizing the efficiency of our uses as well. And just because small customers are small, in aggregate, we're big. And so that's important to not lose those potential benefits.
I'll mention something that we've done in Oregon is the PUC has created a pool of what they call intervenor funding, which is specific to environmental justice communities. So this just started officially this year, where utilities do pay for a pool of funding that pay up to 5 EJ agencies to actually be a part of the PUC process and to work directly with utilities to avoid, like exactly what Michelle's saying, right, this lost opportunity, not only for people to be a part of solutions, but also to receive the benefits from some of the solutions that are going out there, you know, like if there's going to be monetary savings or resiliency like opportunities, what we want is there to be equitable access. And so that's actually been a really interesting process because you have very different cultures, you know, coming and with very different priorities coming together to find solutions together. And we're very excited about that approach.
I see Travis probably has a question when he's popping on, but I wanted to add to something that Sherrie said there, because I think some of us are in states where we know intervenor comp is never coming to our state. And that shouldn't be the end of the conversation. There are other ways for our commissions to bring people whose expertise is specifically in energy equity and energy justice, environmental justice, to the table. So maybe holding a technical conference with you know, these types of experts coming in and speaking to them. There's a way to hear those voices. It won't be as loud as what you're describing in Oregon with a full intervenor compensation, and these folks are at the table through the whole thing. But I think for other states who don't see that as a solution, let's be creative and find other solutions to make sure we hear those voices.
So before we jump to Travis, I have a quick question. Is that okay, Travis? Because I do know we have audience questions now, but you know, we've talked a lot about residential and small commercial consumers. The one thing we haven't talked about is some of the large electricity consumers, and you know, some of the objectives that a lot of them are seeing lately. Is there a disconnect that you see between, you know, some of our residential small commercial consumers and some of those large power consumers? And if so, if there is a disconnect, how do we start to address that?
Well, I've seen some, and this is getting a little bit more in the nitty gritty of reliability, more than the broader topic of resource adequacy. But there are certain segments of the industrial society, industrial class of customers who really need a very, very, very high level of reliability. They can't weather just a little, you know, blip in the power, whereas, you know, most of the time residential can. Although I did talk about at our prep meeting, I lost a fridge recently, but that may have been its age as a contributing factor. But but you know, most of the time, if our power blips off, you know, we have to, you know, reset the microwave clock. And so if we're starting to talk about resource adequacy to meet that level, that's very, very costly. And I think those are times that we might need to evaluate having different types of tariffs. And maybe I'll leave it there because I'll start to get wonky and talk about regulation again. That might not be what the topic here is, but that's a case where there's maybe a little bit of disconnect. And but it can be we can differentiate customer types. But of course, I'm not saying that we want to jeopardize small customers. I just think small customers might not want to pay for that, 0.99999 level of reliability.
Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and go to Travis with audience questions.
Great, good deal. So this just came in from the chat a little while ago, and it says, what are your views on compensating some customers to reduce their demand in energy when needed, and customers that are not compensated are forced to participate in rolling blackouts? Should something like this be in place, such as compensating the customers so there is motivation to prevent and motivate the industry to ensure resource adequacy?
Well, I believe that we should have those in place, and that's kind of what I was saying when I said, I'm not such a fan of the emergency requests, and certainly not rolling blackouts. But I do think that that's one of the situations where we want to look at, again, whether it's cost beneficial. So we don't want to be compensating customers more than we need to get that as a resource. But I've worked a lot in energy efficiency over the years from different perspectives. Like now I'm just doing it as a, reviewing it, kind of a perspective. But I think there are a lot of folks who are really good at program design in that field, and they do have a lot of good data. And so let's get it so that, because isn't it less costly to pay a little bit in rates to ask other people who can afford, who can weather the turning off the power? Then that's less costly to me than the unexpected rolling blackout and what that might do, both from an economic, but also a safety, potential safety perspective. So I think we should absolutely be looking at those programs and expanding those programs. And when I talk about demand response programs, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Michele, thank you. That's all I have for audience questions, but I encourage the audience to put it into the chat or use the raise your hand feature. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Travis. So I have a general question, and that is, for WECC, what can WECC do to help educate, to help better convey the message of resource adequacy to our customers out there?
Well, Branden, your staff might not like what I'm going to say, but I've been thinking about this a lot. And you know that I've been, a little on the edge of the outskirts of resource adequacy for a while. I'm a big fan of the WARA that you guys have done. And then there's always the question of who's the audience for for the materials you put together. And so, you've got a technical audience. You've got a policymaker audience. And I wonder if, from an aspirational perspective, you might want to look at a future phase where it's really an individual consumer audience, where you take this great work that you're already doing, the studies that you're already doing, and translate it into something. Now, how do we get the word out? Is that a field of dreams? You build it and they'll come? I don't know. But that if there were kind of that repository of independent evaluation and explanation, but at the right level of communication, as Sherrie's already been describing, maybe that could be really of value. Maybe organizations like Sherrie's could utilize that when they're meeting, when they're doing more on the ground work. So that was just one brainstorm idea I had, but I always, kind of laugh at myself when I talk about field of dreams solutions, but I don't know, it's something to consider.
No, it's kind of interesting too. I've noticed over the last couple of years, so we participate, we work with other regions to develop the NERC seasonal assessments, the NERC long-term assessments. And, we've seen over the last couple of years that a lot of the NERC assessments are starting to get more and more media coverage. And so, one of the challenges, like you said, Michele, is to make sure that the message is conveyed very clearly at the appropriate level. So the point is taken very well. So thank you.
And I'll say WECC is new to me. You guys are not known in my industry at all until y'all approached me, honestly. But I think that a lot around energy, it's interesting to see like online conversations. Like there's a lot of kind of culture war stuff happening around energy that I feel like started out of EV conversations and, well, what's charging the electric vehicle and is that reducing pollution? And I think that like misinformation can run kind of rampant, but also like the answers to people's questions vary greatly, like state by state. I'll say that, what else I was going to mention about intervener funding is like community-based organizations can't be like doing on the ground work, direct service all day long, and then come to a conference and understand anything that you're talking about, or even understand why resource adequacy matters or anything like that. And that's where it's like continued investment in, climbing that learning curve, that steep learning curve. And it is extremely steep. And I know that as I've entered this space, like looking for places where I can have, that relevant, accessible information to be more and more effective in grid spaces, to be able to understand, what engineers are saying, because what's coming from official spaces isn't going to change anytime soon. And so learning how to navigate that, navigating even like the Public Utility Commission, it's its own learning curve. I've been in the space for years, and half the time I'm like, oh, like there's another step. And so like I think that, being able to have lessons learned from like other areas and be like, what can be replicable in my community? And having a source to go to for that, would be very helpful, I would say, to me and other environmental justice colleagues.
I just want to jump on that and say that it's tricky. It is a challenge when you talk about energy education, and you talked about it being like a culture war, and I would agree. It's very hard. I'll just say I've had a few small forays from my office, which is tiny, into doing more education, and the response from multiple quarters has been, what gives you the right to determine how people get educated on this? So it's tough. It's very politicized. And even when you hear, and then it's hard, like earlier I said, maybe it's going to have to be the utilities who'd educate, but that also comes with its challenges, because I say that as a consumer advocate, and I react to every single thing that utilities on my state say with skepticism. And it's, my response is not no, but my response is always prove it. And so if you're coming at it even from a different, where you don't maybe have, discovery rights like I have, then how do you take that and understand it and know and trust it? And so having a trusted source of independent information would be so valuable, but that's so tough. How do we get there? I don't know.
And you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what to ask because you don't know what's missing. And I would say that like one of the things and utilities teach me and my crew a lot. Like we learn a lot from like our utilities, but we're also learning exactly what the utilities want us to learn, right? Like from their lens and from their perspective and from their point of view. And that should be only one point of view that we're learning. We need to learn that point of view, but it would be nice, I would say, to learn like additional ones to have that confirmation. Because it's that same thing of like, can I trust what you're saying? Just like that, because maybe it's true, but it's partial information and I don't know what's missing because I'm learning it right now.
That's hard. And I know Sherry's not alone in that. One of the things my office does is, we have routine meetings with other stakeholders. So, because we're not a low income advocacy group. So I meet with the other advocates in Utah in that space. And they're always asking me all those exact same questions, like how do we get the information? How, the barriers of participation are too high at the PUC. I mean, all the exact same things that you just said, Sherrie. I know that those are widely held views.
Right. Or now I received information and it's 700 pages long and it's written like a thesis paper. Like who has time to like read that or understand that and even understand like, the bifurcation of block rate increases, like all these like things that are just like, really? And you don't, and again, like that, like relevancy piece is just very tricky.
So it's not clear to me that WECC has a role in this space, but certainly WECC has some of the qualifications, right, of being independent and having the expertise. But is there justification to spend that time and effort to go that extra effort of getting it to a different level for a different audience? And I don't know, but it's something maybe we can all collectively think about.
Yeah, and the one theme that I keep hearing over and over, on this call and on pretty much every other call I'm on lately is, the complexity of the challenges that we're seeing and the pace that they're coming is so fast right now. You really have to be selective about, okay, what initiatives do we want to take on? What do we want to study? What do we want to look at? Who do we want to communicate this information to? Lot of great questions. And Travis, I see you're back on.
I am back on. I've got a question that came in. So this came in from the audience. Are there any organizations, utilities, or jurisdictions that are particularly focusing on measuring how much additional residential energy efficiency measures can cost effectively alleviate a portion of Western resource adequacy issues? Is this something that WECC is exploring?
So I'll answer from my perspective. I don't believe this is something that we're really digging into as a staff currently. I'd be interested, Michele or Sherrie, if there's some more insights or maybe studies or different efforts that you've heard of that are looking into that.
But I think we're seeing it in resource plans, where the resource plans are really evaluating the role that both sort of energy efficiency as well as demand response kind of programs can play. So I know that it was a significant part of PacifiCorp's future plans. And, I haven't really reviewed in detail. I've got certainly quite a number of concerns about the IRP, but I've also have a long history of working collaboratively with their DSM folks, and I'm impressed with the programs that they design. So I don't know if I'm not going to endorse that as saying that it's the best or it's particularly good, but I do think it's definitely fully integrated into their planning, and it's a significant component.
I would agree. I've seen that here as well, as high as 25%. We had seen where they were hoping to get like 25% like savings across like demand response sorts of things, which was very surprising. But yeah, it's definitely on there. And we're part of a study from the Department of Energy and NREL that's looking at like that very thing, like exactly how much can you like squeeze out of a house in that regard.
Well, thank you. That's all we have for questions on this line.
Thank you, Travis. And I see that we're also kind of coming close to the end of our hour. So any final parting words, and I'll kind of prime this a little bit, as you look out in the 10-year time frame, if you're thinking about, what can be done, what should be done, any final words that you want to leave us with in terms of, what consumers can do, what we should be considering in terms of consumers as we consider resource adequacy in the 10-year time frame.
All right. Well, I guess I'll jump in. So I have a few thoughts about the 10 years out, and I'm kind of sharing them with this unknown audience because I did take a peek and I didn't know a lot of people. So, and there are a lot of call-ins. So, but I think there's a few things. So first of all, to WECC, I say continue the studies that you're doing. I think that in recent years, I'm going to say we now because I am on the member advisory committee and did work on that resource adequacy task force, but have brought a lot of attention to these issues. So I say stay the course and continue with that. And to the commissions, I say, you know, keep the cost effectiveness, set your goal and require the cost effectiveness because we know we're going to see price increases. There's so many elements that are going to create pressures on price. And this is going to, I mean, Sherrie knows much more than I how it's hurting the vulnerable populations, but I will say it's impacting affordability across the board, which really is impacting more than just the vulnerable populations. And so it's something that we really need to keep in mind. And it's not a just say no, it's a prove it. It's a prove it, make them prove it. And let's find our best path to reach our goals. And then to those of us who are in the space where we're designing programs, so that's utilities and the stakeholders that are directly interacting, let's work really hard on programs to make sure that they're accessible. Like I'm just going to revisit what Sherrie said about internet access, for example. Maybe that's got to be a bigger component of thinking about electric programs. I mean, Sherrie's like, not maybe, definitely. So yes, it should be a bigger component. And we need to think about the programs that are accessible, understandable, and you know, pretty easy to participate in. Let's not make every household have an energy manager. Let's make it just be something that can be self-sustaining, and then we'll see the small consumers play a significant role, at least, in the overall resource adequacy picture. So those are my 3 thoughts.
Thank you, Michele.
I think my biggest thoughts are about like if we want to increase participation in new spaces, if public utility commissions are like, we wish more people from the public would come to our meetings and participate in our processes, or we wish more community-based organizations were involved, or utilities having the same things. We wish we could increase like our partnerships with these areas. Like, I think that's a space where it's like, I'll say, you know, be bold, like be ready to be challenged, like face those challenges as like, you know, with opportunities, like face them with curiosity and exploration and not defensiveness and fear. Like, I think that there's so much, you know, these are very risk-averse organizations that are very, very sensitive to public scrutiny. And sometimes that can hold you back. And so I think that like inviting and creating like spaces so that more and more people can learn about what's needed here. Because I think that like with things like the climate crisis, like all hands have to be on deck, right? Like we all need to be like involved and care about what's happening, because electricity, I would say, has become a fundamental right. You know, in COVID, children couldn't even go to school without electricity, right? So I think that, you know, it's just, let's create those accessible opportunities to work with a wider variety of stakeholders.
Great, thank you. And once again, thank you so much, Sherrie. Thank you so much, Michele, for the great discussion today. I know personally I've been very enlightened. I'm now thinking about resource adequacy in a much different context. So thank you again for participating. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Travis.
Great. Branden, thank you for moderating today's discussion. I'll echo that gratitude and thanks to Sherrie and Michele. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedules to come on and take a look at that consumer perspective and how it applies to resource adequacy. Just want to make a quick note that the monthly series will continue. We are taking a break on July 5th, so we will be back with the resource adequacy discussion series on August 3rd. Again, that will be 10 a.m. Mountain Time, so we look forward to hosting the discussion then. Thanks to all of the participants that signed on this morning. And again, Sherrie and Michele, appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this morning. Great. Take care, guys.